reminder that the workshop on-prem and hybrid/edge computing practices for a new generation NPM and APM has probably just about started in track 3, so if you're interested in that, do head over there swiftly. It will be followed at approximately 3 with another workshop on the subject of 3 practical steps to handle the future of regulation, which will be hosted by Bruce Gustafsson, who's the president and CEO of the Developers Alliance. We continue now with another hugely topical panel discussion. It's called Reimagining the Future of Health with Big Tech Giants and AI. So please welcome your moderator to the stage. It's Kevin Pereau, who's the founder and principal of TranscendIT Health. Please welcome to the stage, Kevin.
Bonjour les amis, comment ça va? Ça va bien?
Merci.
Bienvenue à Montreal. Okay, for those of you that don't speak French, and especially for those of you who do speak French, welcome friends to Montreal and Reimagining the Future of Healthcare. You've probably noticed on the screen that we're missing a few of our participants. For as much as we'd love to believe that COVID's behind us, we still are reminded sometimes that not quite turn the corner on that just yet. A couple of housekeeping comments and notes. We do like to have a lot of questions from the audience, and we do that at the end. But I promise you, if you raise your hand throughout the session, it will give us an idea of how many questions that you have and how much time to allot. So with that, let's get into it. Geeta, I'm going to put you on the spot because you are one of the first people that I met when I transitioned into healthcare. Wow, I don't even want to tell these folks how long ago it was, but I remember in those early days we were talking about, will people engage or won't they engage? Will they give us their data? Will they share their data with us? And boy, all I can remember is a lot of the myths that we had about what people will and won't do back then. We just exploded them. We got a lot of that wrong, didn't we? So I mean, we could walk right down memory lane, right? I mean, back then, the health plans were highly skeptical, and that paved way to the quantified self movement and big data. And the smartest guys in the room were still looking backwards and saying, I can tell you what just happened and why. So as we get connected, an exciting thing is happening, AI. And AI gives us the ability to get actionable insights into the data that we share with our providers and our trusted sources. So, Geeta, let's start with the low-hanging fruit. What do you see as the immediate, the short-term, and the long-term opportunities and possibilities for AI in healthcare? And gentlemen, I'll be asking you to also chime in with your thoughts when Geeta's done.
Great. Well, first of all, Kevin, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Just want to also thank World AI Summit, specifically Caroline, for the invitation. I'm so sorry that I'm not able to be there in person. Look, I think the long and short of it is, first of all, I was always right, Kevin? That sidebar conversation in the hallway, so I'm not going to admit to not knowing, but certainly no one could have anticipated many of the changes that came with COVID and the acceleration of the will that we're seeing in the marketplace to say, how can technology be a part of the solution? I think it's important for us to think about the short-term low-hanging fruit and then the long-term solves that are chronically in the system. And really the short-term solves from my perspective as a physician in the space and as a health tech physician is we've done so much of technology really wrong from a provider lens, right? When we think about how the EHR movement really started, we really off-put much of the physician care team workforce because we truly didn't understand the workflow. And the low-hanging fruit, when I think about the opportunities with AI, is to remedy some of those things. So if we think of documentation, if we think of pajama time, this idea that so many providers are going home after hours to document their notes, which is what the EHR was supposed to do in the first place. So there's some really short-term opportunities there when we think about how we can very quickly document. There's also some really short-term opportunities when we think about clinical decision support, right? Nobody knows everything all of the time. And with the enormous amount of innovations happening on the front lines of clinical trials and clinical medicine and precision medicine, the opportunity to use AI to really action up that data to the doctor at the point of care. If I'm seeing a patient who's a 45-year-old white male with lupus, I want the latest studies on that individual case and that individual treatment regimen. And a lot of that is not available today. Low-hanging fruit for both a better consumer experience, but also a better physician experience. And too often we divorce those two when they should actually be connected. We are facing a physician shortage, a nursing shortage, a lot of burnout issues. And so if we think about where to focus in the short term, it's to alleviate some of these big, big issues in the healthcare delivery system of today. Long term, there are any number of opportunities when we think about diagnostics and treatments. Look, we've seen a lot of AI technology showing us that it's better than the human eye when we think about radiology, when we think about pathology, and certainly we're seeing the same in oncology. So there are any number of ways AI can offer an opportunity in the therapeutic space, but I think that's further out. And this dream, if you talk to a lot of the technologists and the engineers, is to replace the doctor and replace the nurse. I think that's the wrong goal. Healthcare continues to be a very personalized experience, and there needs to be a trusted partner on the other side, of which technology can be a tool, just like the MRI, just like the stethoscope. But looking at it from a very short-term and long-term problem solve, I think is the right approach.
You've raised an interesting point. That's that a lot of these technologies, I've consulted with innovators now for about 12 years. I think the epiphany moment for them was figuring out that these technologies, they're not replacing your doctor, right? They should be better connecting you to your doctor. It's not in lieu of or in place of. It's an extension of your doctor's ability to come out and service you. We have two other individuals on the stage that are very well credentialed. What do you, Sonny? Let's go to you first. One, she's raised some interesting points. Do you align, and can you think of anything else?
Yes, certainly. I echo Geeta's sentiments. When I'm not, helping Roche manage its large portfolio of drugs and diagnostic solutions, I certainly am working still as an ICU doctor and as an internist. And so that tension that Geeta articulated, I feel it on a daily basis. And certainly, EMRs were supposed to be the panacea. They were sold to us as they're going to make my life easier so I can get to the patient and spend more time with them. It's done the exact opposite. And so, we have to be reticent that the new generation of technologies that are transformative, happens to have the word transformer in it with the GPT-4, we have to execute, validate, and make sure that it does actually aid and abet our workflow and help us get to the patient more, so we're spending more time at the bedside, so it continues to be a personalized experience. Because all of us have been in that room with our doctor, where the doctor is just staring at the EMR and not even looking at you. I feel it. I get that at my own family doctor, so I know you felt that tension. So the short-term goal for me is Geeta alluded to it. There's a crisis in healthcare. Our systems are burnt out, specifically in Canada. We were at once at the top of the world in terms of our healthcare system being national and being the pride of the world, and now we're like really struggling. And so, how do we help our current very limited human resources perform their jobs, automate some of that low-hanging fruit, some of these tasks, with those unimodal AIs, where it's very simple, singular task? There's 400, 500 algorithms out there, and some of those specialties where we can automate things, make things faster. But the long-term goal for me, and I don't want to get it, I'm going to open that Pandora's box, I don't want to do it, but generative AI, it doesn't do one task, it does hundreds of tasks. So when Geeta talked about, what does it look like in the future? What does it look like for me? Well, like she said, we're not perfect beings, we're not infallible. So when I walk into a room and I'm seeing a patient, I want the AI to tell me if I've messed up. I want to be able to ask questions of the AI. It suggests that I need to give this patient insulin. I want to be able to ask why, because I may not be on the same page because the patient has a hyperkalemic episode that's life-threatening. Okay, tell me more about that. It'll then educate me. Give me a paper. Boom. It'll literally generate all the data I need in a single moment in time, and we'll get to this place where we don't even need keyboards anymore. And we'll truly go back to being doctors the way that they were intended to be. So that, to me, is a long-term goal.
I agree 100%. I'm a surgeon, a bariatric and minimally invasive surgeon practicing in Boston. Similar perspective overall in medicine, but just bringing to the surgical world a little bit. I think we can only learn and improve our lives by embracing this. We shouldn't be fearful about this whole AI revolution. We should be embracing those changes and learning how we can actually develop them moving forward. Like I like to call this is a augmentation of our intelligence. It's not a replacement. You know, like if you can use like the chat GPT, you can use our iPhones, can use anything this day and age to make us much more productive. Why we are so fearful to do this in the healthcare? And just because it's also healthcare is very traditional, especially in surgery, and it takes long time to see those changes to occur. In the short term, I could totally see like, you know, preparing for being ready for surgery, with integration of the medical records of the patient known factors, you know, then bring it to the operating room. The day you could actually have computer vision mapping what's happening in real time on those surgical videos and guiding us, for example, to see something that has never been seen before by the particular surgeon. Again, is augmenting the surgeon's cognitive capabilities, not replacing it. And in the end, everybody wins. And then you just later just look for outcomes, registries, and reports. The way we learn as surgeons, by our colleagues' mistakes sometimes, is through a conference called the Morbidity Mortality Conferences, where we discuss once a week every single thing that has happened. Is a peer review is protected. But then I have to be imagining what the surgeon described actually happened in the operating room to then try to understand. If you can actually enable machine learning to do this for us, you know, we all learn exponentially by the second. And I think that's going to be helping us a lot. One of the challenges, I think, is the whole cultural transformation. We need to go through it because especially surgeons are very reluctant to get their data to be actually shared, especially the surgical act. The way we report this day and age is when we do an operation, could be a half an hour or 4-hour operation, is a piece of operative report that I describe what I've seen. And a lot of the times this day and age, those are templated. So if you could add the machine to do this for us and unbiasedly see what actually happened and translate them to data, they're for sure going to be moving us forward. So, but we need to be also like making them much more susceptible to accept those changes and train the patients as well. For the long term, for the future, we have this vision that's called a creation of a computational collective surgical consciousness. That's where the machine learning have learned from all the mistakes and all the good outcomes that has happened in all the surgicals in the world. And that AI agent or AGI or whatever you're going to be calling, going to be assisting us with every single surgical procedure unbiasedly, and then continue to learn from that.
I'd like to ask you a follow-up question on ChatGTP. But Sonny, first, take me to the future where we don't have to use our keyboards. I'm telling you, I've got the fattest fingers in town, and my typos are legendary. But with regards to ChatGTP, I mean, first off, how many have actually used ChatGTP in the audience? It's kind of an interesting phenomenon, right? I mean, as I look at the use case of ChatGTP in healthcare, and I have to say nothing excites or terrifies me as much as ChatGTP, right? I've used it to study the Garifuna culture down in Belize. That's not the same as what we're talking about up here. Should we be concerned? I mean, I have this image in my head from my tech days. We're all familiar with the expression garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about using ChatGTP in healthcare?
First of all, I'm a ChatGPT user, the 4.0. I love it. I think that's like one of the best tools ever designed. And I just said a tool. It's not like a super intelligent being that's actually, comparable to us. And I think that in medicine, every time that we interpret a result, an EKG or a labs or a CT scan or anything or assess a surgical field and going to make a determination, we ultimately are responsible for the decision, right? If we're going to be using this type of transformer, or could be any other ones in the future from Google or other platforms, we are also responsible for the output of that, recommendation. Just recently, I believe there was some debates with Springer, which is a big publisher in medical literature, that I believe Nature, we're going to start accepting papers that are going to be published with the help of the chat. as long as the main author, maintain a responsibility about the content that's being put over there. So in other words, to summarize, I think we as physicians, we can use that to make us more productive, to perhaps to save time and some more time with the patients without a keyboard, but we ultimately are responsible about what's going to be said. And the prompts are the keys, is how you reason with the machine, that's the key about the good outcome to get good information.
Sonny, you're a tech guy, right? You've had successful startups. What are your thoughts on ChatGPT?
I'm a dangerous tech guy because I know a little bit of it, so I think I know a lot.
That's the best discussion to have, brother.
One of those tech guys. I agree with Oz with one caveat, and it is an amazing tool. You talked about exciting but terrifying, so I feel like I'm on a roller coaster ride when I'm actually interfacing with ChatGPT. The prompts are critical. It's not what question you're asking, it's how you're asking the question, and I'll give you an example. So this is not me who did this work. It's Joshua Sarver. I've never met the guy, but I read about him on the internet. He's an emerge doc. He decided to take all the cases he looked at and he saw in the emergency room, anonymize them all, cut and paste the text from the EMR, throw it into the ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, this is a patient seen in the emergency room. What's the differential diagnosis? I didn't want to take a stab at how accurate it was. And remember, ChatGPT was trained on data from back in 2021 and not medical domain data. We're not talking about millions of patients of data from an EHR or the medical literature that Oz is talking to. We're talking about just random text, and to be frank, it's kind of opaque. We're not even sure what data was used for ChatGPT, and that's a bit of the issue in medicine. I want some transparency. If I'm going to trust and reliably trust that data and sign a paper that it co-authored for me, I better damn now know where that stuff came from. And to be honest with you, those aren't my thoughts. I joined Roche about 7 months ago, and Roche had this community of practice around ethics and AI and responsible governance. I'm like, what's this all about? Because I'm a tech guy. I'm like, I just uniformly embrace tech. What about ethics and governance? And to be honest with you, they're spot on. If we don't validate this tech responsibly and ethically deploy it, we're going to get into a real issue. So to ask the question, anyone take a guess how accurate ChatGPT was in diagnosing 40 emerge patients? It was a flip of a coin, guys, 50%.
Wow.
50%. And so, of course, it wasn't trained on medical data. It'll probably get to that level of fidelity when you train it on proper data.
Yep.
But right now, I have an issue with it. There's a liability concern. There's hallucinating. It's making stuff up. It's citing references that don't exist. So as much as I marvel at how conversational and how sentient it seems, I'm not sure I'm going to allow it to augment my practice just yet.
Got it.
Just add something really quick. I mean, I agree with you 100%. I think a different way to see this is that not as a threat, but as an opportunity, knowing that if you can use similar framework or platforms to train it, go and use the API, train properly, get validated by the ground truth, which are physicians or whatever other field, and then get tested and then get approved by the FDA. That's how I think all those AI apps in the future are going to be validated. But I think if we are mindful about this and take charge of this, we can control and make this very well.
Yeah.
Geeta, if only someone would write a book about this, eh?
Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate the plug. So I do have a book coming out. It is on misinformation in healthcare. To, I think, both of my panelists' points, there's a lot of confusion out there on the part of the consumer, and they are looking for a doctor, a nurse, a provider to guide them. My book was not written with or by ChatGPT. I would just like to say that. I might have to have a disclaimer going forward, given the way the world is going. This is actually written by a human.
It's so funny.
But I think, again, low-hanging fruit. If you think about just access to information, if you ask any patient today, I'm a rheumatologist, the number one thing they want from me is access. Dr. G, I just had a question. I just wanted to know about whether this treatment was the right treatment or not, or I got confused about X, Y, or Z. I heard this from my neighbor. People just want access. Is that something that AI can help us with? Basic information.
Yeah.
We think about everything that happened with COVID-19, the way science and facts kind of became taboo. Of course, there's an opportunity there. But to Sonny's point, just like self-driving cars, how many people are hopping in a self-driving car anytime soon? You'll see hands go down in the audience, right? Still having the driver in the driver's seat, still having the doc, the nurse there is paramount. And are there ways that we could maybe be safer drivers, safer providers of medicine? Absolutely. there are all kinds of dysfunctions in the system, but we have to keep our eye on the goal, which is this time technology has to be done with doctors, with nurses, with patients, not to them. So much of the digital transformation health tech, Kevin, when we first talked in that hallway, everything was being thrown at us from a regulatory standpoint. It was just get paper records and make them digital. That was about as far as anyone thought, right? And then there were 25 downstream effects that we're all still feeling the pain of. So when we think about AI and we think about both the good, the bad, and the ugly, it is really important to keep our eye on the problem that we're solving versus just doing it because we can. Because to Sonny's point, the hallucinations are very scary. If I'm taking care of a 45-year-old white male who has lupus, which is an unusual patient presentation for lupus, by the way, and the technology I use to help me make that clinical decision is hallucinating on the treatment regimen or hallucinating on the data, and I rely on that as a physician. Am I liable? Am I not liable? It was presented to me as fact. No similar, again, no different than a stethoscope or an MRI. We rely on these technologies to give us factual information. So until we are there, we have to also be really clear on what we can do and what we can't. And I think starting crawl, walk, run. I know no one wants to hear that who's innovating, but that is actually the right approach when we think about medicine, because it is very much like the self-driving car. We are dealing with people's lives. And many of these things cannot be reversed once you've made the wrong decision or the wrong choice. So very important to jump in eyes wide open in the era of AI.
Sonny, I want to riff on something that you mentioned, and that's the ethical dilemma of AI. Where do the guardrails go? Who puts the guardrails where they belong? Should we be concerned about that?
That's a great question. So it takes large organizations to inform policy, work with the vector institutes and the MILAs and government to create policy. But you know what? I'm going to share my candid fears and what keeps me up at night in terms of fears, and also what keeps me up at night in terms of excitement around this when you talk about guardrails. So right now, Oz talked about we need to stay in control of this. I agree with that sentiment philosophically, but the reality is I'm one of those doctors like many that had an EHR shoved down my throat. I had no control over that technology. My only control was interfacing with a service representative to complain about some of the bugs, and some of those bugs were fixed, some of them weren't. So my fear is when you talk about something like generative AI, there's only a few organizations on earth that can run those programs, that have the ability to even train them. So what control am I going to have sitting in my little ICU? I'm very concerned about that. That keeps me up at night. I want to have information, make sure it's transparent, so then I know that I can trust. So when I do see that white male with lupus, it's like, okay, this is a unicorn, this is unusual, but it's going to give me reliable information. So that's what keeps me up at night in terms of fears. But then the exciting part, there was a time where we all looked at our smartphones going, this would be cool to watch TV on. Converging technologies, all these converging technologies came together, and then just blows our minds today, right? So what happens when generative AI and 3D construction gets together? What happens when generative AI truly reaches its potential, text to video to audio, all those modes of information together? So when Oz is scoping a patient, he's scoping the patient, he's like, oh, what's that AI? It actually zones in on that area and says, it's this, it's an artery, don't cut that. Okay, interesting, take me to it literally, it's just imagine the transformative potential of converging technologies and all these modes of information, and the generative AI is just walking through it seamlessly like your best friend. That excites me, for sure.
Oz, you're shaking your head up and down. Did he nail it?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with him 100%. One thing I want to add is like when we see this as a practice physician, as a surgeon, right? A lot of the times you think about how many years you go through medical school, how many years you go through residency and fellowship, and then a machine tells you that you're doing something wrong, right? Even though how the machine was trained. Like I can see a lot of people, there's going to maybe, even if the technology is there, going to take a generation for people to adopt that. That's number one. But what worries me about is like the way the pressures we are having as physicians, at least in the United States, I don't know how it's in Canada, is that productivity. We've got to produce more, and more. We're actually making less dollars per patient than we used to, and the inflation goes up. Many states in the United States does not let the physicians adjust their income based on the inflation as well. So then the only answer is they just see being more and more and more patients, right? With that productivity, the EHR, then 40% of your time is documenting. That's where the burnout comes out from.
That's right.
What I'm afraid is that then a non-properly validated technology may get introduced, and then the hospital administration say, oh, this is going to help you so much because it's going to be doing your notes, going to be doing this and that, going to help you with the diagnosis. And then you're so burned out, then you're going to say, sure, why not? So I can actually see more patients who make the same amount of money. And that's one of the things that we're not focusing on, the bias that we're developing this type of technologies, that the productivity is going towards the corporation, the healthcare corporations, the insurance companies, not towards the physicians and the patients. So that's one thing we need to look at. As far as like being pragmatic when developing something, like we were talking about on the backstage, one of our societies is called SAGES. It's a Society for Minimally Invasive Surgery. But it's a global society, but based in the United States. We just had our annual meeting here in Montreal 3 weeks ago. Wow. 7,000 surgeons members. We decided 5 years ago to create a protocol to research and develop a sustainable and scalable framework for surgical AI. And we look about the foundation for the standards for the video annotation, standards for the video structure, standards for the governance, looking how we're going to be acquiring data, how we're going to be utilizing to the life cycle. But one thing that we found that was very, very important was the cultural transformation. How are we going to be making people to understand that it is so important if they can actually, see it? And we need help from everybody to be joining this together, not just the surgeons, but also the physicians, the patients and the users of this type of technology. So I think it's very important for us to be, even though it's hard, I know they're going to be pushing towards us, we should be fighting back and say, no, we have to be in a driver's seat. So,
Geeta, how does big tech firms like Salesforce feel about that? Do you align with the comments here, or is it different for the technology providers than it is for the innovators and the physicians?
So speaking as myself, right, not on behalf of Salesforce, but speaking as myself, just watching the market, it's clear that big tech will play a role, right, as they always have in all of these things. But like I said, it's very important that this time this is done. We learn from the lessons of the past, which is that this time this has to be done with physician leadership, both by big tech, right, making investments in hiring folks like myself, Sonny, et cetera. There are many chief medical officers across the ecosystem. So making sure that physicians are both in the product development, as well as the strategy, as well as on the customer side, right? So that when you are on the ground, presumably at a provider, you also have physician leadership there that is very much pivoting, with the strategy and with the product as it rolls out. A lot of this was really done after the fact with EHRs, and it's why so many on the front lines of medicine are turned off by technology, and it becomes a much harder sell now to think of these things as assets as opposed to barriers. So I think big tech, of course, will play a huge role. This is going to be products that likely come from big tech, but the success and the long-term success will depend on the short-term success. And doing that really with the physician mindset, a nurse mindset, and a patient mindset is critical, and truly has not been done before. Truly has not been done correctly across the board in a scalable way. And so I think that's the biggest opportunity, is how does the industry actually work together with the healthcare ecosystem to achieve all of the outcomes we all want.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about big tech, but before we do, if AI is a data-driven platform, who owns the data, right? I mean, isn't that the time-honored question, right? Is it the patient data? Is it the consumer that owns the data? Is it Epic and Cerner? Who own the data? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I mean, the nice thing about, I joined Roche about 8 months ago, and what drew me to the organization is shared values, their approach to ethics and governance, and their position is it's the patients that own the data. And we've actually contributed to a pan-Canadian data health strategy. We're really pushing that narrative, and the goal is that data should be accessible to all the stakeholders to help improve the patient outcome. And so to me, uniformly, the patient should be at the center of that data. It's just like taking the actual patient's physical examination. I mean, that's a very intrusive process. And anyone would say to you, that's my body, that's my data. It's an extension of that is the electronic data record.
I agree.
Just a different take on that. If I've actually sat in a few panels before to discuss that specifically, because, like, for example, for us, the substract to create surgical AI is the surgical video. And without a surgical video, we cannot do computer vision science and develop that. And the biggest question is like, so does that surgical video, let's say we talk about the data right now as a surgical video, does that belong to the patient? I said, sure, it should belong to the patient. However, that video never exists, wasn't for the interaction between the patient and the surgeon with the recording equipment that a big tech company made within the hospital settings that was paid by the insurer, within the governance of the hospital and the GDPR or HIPAA. So the answer is maybe that data belongs to all of that, you know, and should have like a global consent to understand, because let's say the patient consents to let their video to be used to something else, but at the same time, that's exposing the surgeon's technique, which is their own work, right? Or it might be exposing the hospital means or the insurance company who pay for it. So we're planning to put a surgical video data governance summit at the end of the year with many stakeholders from many societies, including patients as well, to be discussing those themes. And especially the best we can potentially come up with an expert consensus and publish that and open more for further conversations. But this is being asked all over the world, and I don't think it's going to be able to answer that anytime soon.
Can I ask a provocative question?
Sure.
So if that's the case, and I certainly echo that sentiment, you know, there's a lot of stakeholders at play, but what if the patient says, no, you can't use that data for generating your own data set for an AI to help you for the next surgical procedure? What then? Okay. Is there an opt-out?
I think stops right there.
Yeah,
so in general, like for example, in many academic hospitals, when we want to do research, including the utilization of the surgical video and the patient data in the EHR, they sign a consent agreeing that that information may be used for research, education, and quality improvement. You know, up to that point, I mean, I have never seen a problem that somebody asked to record. The biggest problem will be when you start seeing monetization on the data and development of new technologies. That's where you're going to see, you know, people kind of, you know, raising their eyebrows and asking questions about it.
Geeta, the question was, who owns the data? Is that something that you're going to be delving into in your book, or what are your thoughts on that today? I mean, if AI is a data-driven platform, where do we get the data from?
I mean, there's no doubt that the patient owns the data, right? And everything has to be done HIPAA compliant, and should there be data sharing, it needs to be with the patient's permission, right? As the discussion here stated. I think where it gets complicated is very similar to consent, right? Patients often sometimes don't know where the data is going, right? How many times you've downloaded that app and it's like 5 pages of terms and sheets and you're like, I agree, or I don't agree, right? So I think like consent, you have to, as we learn more about AI, this might be something that's part of the consent process, because my sense is this is going to be a much more complicated data journey than what we've experienced to date. I also will say that the patients are responsible to be educated. And I think this is something that is missing, particularly from the American healthcare system. The idea that AI is going to solve all of your problems, your doctor is going to solve all of your problems. You know, I think we learned that, or were reminded of it during COVID. And we are living in a world where now people are wearing devices like this and, you know, and rings and all kinds of things where they're collecting all kinds of data, but they have no idea what it means. I mean, I've had patients say, hey, you want to see my heart rate for like the past 6 months? And I'm like, no, actually, I don't. Right? I just need to know the trends. I need to know when you were symptomatic. I need to know when it went high, when it went low. So I think the next phase of this is also the consumer has some ownership in either asking the questions and or taking responsibility for this, because we know that patient outcomes are only amplified when a patient actually understands what is going on with their body, understands the treatment recommendations with their doctor, and is truly a partner in their approach. So I think that's the opportunity with AI, is really to educate. And living in the era of misinformation, and we talk about this in my book, is how do you as a consumer sift though what is fact from fiction, and how do you also take the responsibility when you have some of these devices to understand what it actually means? That's really the next phase of all of the data, is what does it actually mean?
Thank you very much. I do want to leave some time for questions. We have about 5 minutes left. I see some hands going up. We have one in the front down here, actually 2 in the front. If we could have our folks with the microphones do their thing. Thank you very much. And if you don't want this addressed to a specific person, please just say so.
Thank you very much. Ken Matsurinis, McGill University. My question is, what are your comments or your thoughts on who will own the technology? And how will the financial benefits and financial risks be shared between the private owners, the financiers, the users, and the government?
Sonny, why don't you take this? This is your life, brother. You just had a very successful startup, and you lived that.
You're so cruel. I don't even know where to go with that. No, to be honest with you, that is the million-dollar question. So, if I'm putting on my pharma hat, for example, there's a new molecule that's game changer for rare disease, but it may not always produce the same outcome in every patient. So, the government's a stakeholder, the hospital delivering the medicine stakeholder, the pharmaceutical company that created the treatment a stakeholder, and we're starting to devise risk-sharing models around that. And so nobody's left holding the bag, and everyone derives the benefit. The healthcare system derives the benefit because that patient's better cared for, their outcomes improve, they're interfacing with the healthcare system less. The costs for the healthcare system go down, the patient benefits for a better quality of life, perhaps a prolonged lifespan and health span. And then the pharmaceutical company benefits by getting to their primary aim, which is improving a patient outcome and also generating a profit. So to me, a risk-sharing model is very nuanced. It depends on what the technology is, and it depends what the application of the technology is. But in general, I'm thoroughly in favor of stakeholder-based, value-based agreements around sharing risk.
Thank you very much, Sonny. Could we come here next? We have one down here.
Sorry. Sorry, thank you. First of all, thank you for this panel. As always, I'm Daniela Oliveira from the Health Ministry of Quebec, from its Department of Analysis and Artificial Intelligence. So thank you so much for this panel. It's always enlightening to hear from surgeons and physicians. From what I understand, there are two types of acceptance relating to adoption. There are two types of acceptance and resistance to adoption of, say, ChatGPT and any kind of AI, really. There is one that is, we accept the risks compared to the benefits, and we adopt the technology. There is the burnout. We're just too tired, so we accept the technology. We don't want that. There is the resistance that is actually turned into the absence of a quantification of hallucination, or the fact that you can develop your trust in a tool that is right 80% of the time. You never know when is the 20% that is not. And then there is so it's a valid resistance, and then there is the resistance that is just attachment to culture, that you don't want that either. So I was just wondering if you had insights about how to navigate acceptance and resistance, like to avoid the bad ones and make sure you acknowledge the good ones.
Is it directed to just the group at large, or
Sorry?
is it directed to any one individual?
No, for all of the three, actually.
Oz, would you like to start?
What I can say is, I think all those nuances that you described is like regular, like people's life, right? In everything. I think we just have to be, do the arbitrage between us, to judge what's right and what's wrong. And we, at the end, should be the referee of the decision. As a physician, as a patient, you should never accept, like, if, let's say, how about the famous ChatGPT from OpenAI, say something could be hallucinating. I say, you're hallucinating. I'm not going to accept that, So even when you compare about, like, for example, readings from radiology, and you have a physician reading is an certain accuracy. You see the machine reading is a certain accuracy. When you put those together, that's when you get a higher accuracy. It's almost going to get like two physicians working together, two people driving, looking at the road sometime together. But that's what I think we should do. We should be mindful about it. The technology is a tool to help me. I can choose to agree or not. What was the determination?
Okay, great. Geeta, any final thoughts on that? Did you hear the question? It was kind of.
Yes, I did. No, I completely agree. I completely agree. And I think it goes back again to the self-driving car example, though I think depends who's in your car, right? You said sometimes two people in the other row is not a good idea. So yes, I do. I think again, it all leads back to the complement that we've been talking about, and also we're just not, autonomy is not necessarily the goal. It's really how do you complement, and then how do you scale? Because ultimately all of these technologies are meant to help us scale, and that's really the problem that we have today.
Okay, great. Well, we are on the clock here, so I do want to thank our panelists for joining us today. We never know what kind of questions that we're going to get, but what I will say is none of us are leaving. So even though the panel discussion's over, you're welcome to find us as we walk off the stage. We'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have. And so from all of us, thank you very much for attending the session. We hope you got something out of it, and enjoy Montreal and enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Bon match.
Thank you.
Thanks, Geeta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very, very interesting panel discussion. I'm sure everyone will agree. And never easy when someone is virtual, but definitely pulled it off. So thank you very much for that. So just a reminder to everyone that there is a workshop on the 3 practical steps to handle future regulations, which started about 10 minutes ago. It's in the workshop track. If you're interested in that, you can run and catch it. It's hosted by Bruce Gustafson, President and CEO of Developers Alliance. So please do find that if you have an interest in that. We are setting up briefly here, but this will be, just so you know, our penultimate session before the afternoon break, where you are welcome to stretch your legs and get some more coffee, but please do stick around because we've got a very interesting speaker. We're going to be listening to Jasjeet Singh, who is the global